Standing here, it's hard to believe that this place was nearly erased from the map again and again. Most cities are built once. This one wasn't. This hill has been conquered, abandoned, burned, and rebuilt so many times that honestly, it shouldn't exist at all. And yet, people kept coming back. Mongols, Hungarian kings, Ottoman sultans. If you wanted to control Central Europe, you had to control this city. Before cafes and ruin bars, before Budapest even had its name, it was a frontier chosen for war. From medieval kingdom to Ottoman frontier. And how a city that was never meant to survive somehow did. Sziasztok, tesó. Jó reggelt kívánok. Today, I'm going to be showing you guys a side of Budapest that you probably haven't seen before. Today, we're going to focus on Budapest as a city that was never meant to survive. So come along with me on this journey. Welcome to a tropical day here in Budapest. What does a tropical day in Budapest entail? -5 degrees Celsius or 21 degrees Fahrenheit if your country has been to the moon. You can see here we have some ice sheets going on down on the river. Hopefully the noise here isn't too bad, but we'll go ahead and roll with it anyways. I'm not crying, the wind's just blowing water out of my eyes. If you've been to Budapest, I'm sure your time here was spent drinking at Instant Fogosh as part of your Prague, Vienna, Budapest trip, and then hungover at the thermal baths. A city that almost every great empire on planet Earth has had a foothold in. The Romans, the Huns, the Avars, the Ostrogoths, the Lombards, the Slavs for a time, and then the Magyars, who the Hungarians descend from. But past that, you had the mighty Ottoman Empire controlling Buda and Budapest for 150 years, and then the Habsburg Empire, who at a time controlled most of Europe, all the Spanish colonial empire, as well as in the 20th century you had your Nazi Germany, Third Reich, subservient government for, half a decade, followed by the most well-known, the Soviet era. We're going to focus all of our attention on the Buda side, the Royal Buda side, highlighting the medieval and the Ottoman eras here in the city. So the city of Budapest, as we know it today, wasn't really a thing until the Magyars came into the Carpathian Basin and established a permanent settlement here. But it wasn't the first permanent settlement here in this area. The Romans actually had a city here named Aquincum. It was a major city on the frontier of the Roman province of Pannonia. But after the fall of Rome, it was a wasteland frontier fought over by many nomadic tribes throughout Europe until we get the Magyar, the famous Magyar, who you now know today as the Hungarians. But who were the Magyars? They were a nomadic tribe from Siberia, around the Ural Mountains. In fact, the closest languages to modern Hungarian are these tribal languages in Siberia. So it's not an Indo-European language. It's part of the Finno-Ugric family tree. So Finnish and Estonian are part of that tree, but they're on the Finno side of the tree. Hungarian is on the Ugric side of the tree. What you need to know about the Hungarians is they made their way from Siberia to the Carpathian Basin in around 895, led by the Grand Prince Arpad. Arpad's father's name was Almos, and the Hungarians around that time had a spiritual leader and a war leader. And at some point, the offices of those two positions combined and were inherited by Arpad or Almos. So from that point on, the Arpad family was a ruling family of the Magyar tribes. At some point, if you follow the Arpad line, you get to Geza. Geza was the grand prince of the Magyar tribes, and he had a son named Vik. Vik is known nowadays as Saint Stephen, the first king of Hungary, who Christianized the nation. Stephen becoming king and Christianizing himself and Christianizing Hungary and the Hungarians was a major point in the nation's history. Up to that point, the Hungarians, the Magyars, were raiding all across Europe. As far as Spain, they were dominant. There was even a common prayer back in the 900s that ended with, "God save us from the Magyars' arrows." At the end of the 10th century, they lost the Battle of Lechfield, and it was at that point Geza knew and Vik, St. Stephen knew that in order to survive, the Hungarians had to become Christian. There's a moment of strategic importance, who to accept the crown from, because at this moment, the Eastern and Western Christian church was beginning to fracture, and after 50 years from the founding of the nation of Hungary, the Kingdom of Hungary, there's the great schism between the Orthodox and the Catholic Church. Stephen chooses to be crowned by the Pope. He gets sent a crown from the Pope. He's not literally crowned by the Pope, but he gets sent a crown from the Pope, gets his blessing as an official Christian king of a European kingdom. But this is important symbolically and politically. If he had taken the Eastern or the eventual Orthodox crown, he would have been subservient in some ways to the Byzantine emperor, and that wasn't obviously a good strategy for a king to be subservient to someone else. Now this is where the story really gets interesting and where we get into the narrative of this was a city never meant to survive. And to do that, we're going to dive into this narrative up there in the Buda castle. Budapest, as you now know it today, is actually a combination of 3 different cities. You have the city of Buda, which we're going to explore today, the city of Pest, and then on the Buda side of the river, farther north, you have Buda. And they didn't become one city until the 19th century. The history of Hungary is actually completely brutal, and it's rarely peaceful. And you can see this with the foundation of the kingdom. When St. Stephen founds the nation, one of the first things that happens is his cousin Copine actually rebels against the king. Copine's pagan still, and he wants to take power. A civil war ensues, and Copine is killed. Stephen then has him quartered, his body quartered, and sent to all the corners of the kingdom as a warning to other pagan lords that want to rise up against Stephen and his newly created Christian kingdom. Got this little archer lookout hole. A lot of the parts of this castle have been under construction recently, so I myself haven't been able to explore everything here, but it's a pretty cool spot. But this violence between Stephen and Copine is really just the tip of the iceberg for the violence to follow within the Arpad family. In the 1040s to 1060s, you get this period where King Andrew I of Hungary invites his brother Bela back from exile, and you're going to hear the name Bela 400 times in this video. But he invites his brother Bela back from exile, and how does Bela repay him? He rebels against his brother because he wants the throne for himself. The 2 brothers fight. Bela wins this confrontation. Andrew dies of wounds fleeing battle, and Bela becomes Bela I of Hungary. Infractricide and kinslaying is a very common theme in the first 300 years of the Kingdom of Hungary's history. So we're up here by the castle now, and continuing the Game of Thrones themes that this video so far has, Kalaman of Hungary fights off a ton of revolts from his brother Almos, who wants to be king. But this time the reigning king wins, and Kalaman has his brother Almos and his son Bela blinded. Why does he blind them instead of killing them? Blinding people rendered them practically and legally unfit to rule. So it rendered both Almos and his son unfit to rule. However, does become Bela II, King of Hungary. But yeah, so we're up here now in the courtyard in front of the Buda Castle. Here is a statue of Eugene of Savoy. We won't really cover him in this video. Actually, we will, because we're talking about the Ottomans. So, Eugene of Savoy, badass military leader for the Habsburg Empire, the Habsburg kings. We won't really go into the depth on him. I might do a whole separate video on Eugene of Savoy, but he played an instrumental role in defeating the Ottomans. So they have a statue of him here in front of Buda Castle for his efforts in liberating Hungary from Ottoman control. So, if you're a casual, you might not know that Hungary, medieval Hungary, the Kingdom of Hungary, is actually one of the largest and most powerful states in Europe for like 500 years. One of the greatest reasons for this is King Louis I of Hungary. He was actually from the house Anjou, came from the Anjou kings of Naples. His dad, Charles, was the first Anjou king of Hungary. In order to become king of Hungary, Charles basically had to fight two other kings, including the king of Bohemia, to secure the crown here. And at that time, Hungary was actually like an oligarchy state run by powerful warlords from all across the kingdom. So Charles spent most of his reign subduing all of these oligarch families across the kingdom and restoring authority back to the crown. And Louis inherited this system and wielded it like a weapon. As king, Louis marched into Italy and defeated the Neapolitans, and for a period of time Naples was under the control of Hungary until Louis was like, it's too much of a headache to put up with this. And the reason why that occurred is because Louis's brother was married to the Queen of Naples, and he was a co-ruler, but the nobility and possibly his wife killed him. So Louis marched a Hungarian army across the Alps, conquered Naples, and subdued them. He also, Louis, at this time, inherited the crown from his uncle, Casimir of Poland. So, for a time, Poland and Hungary were united. Also, Louis, in this time, launched a war against Venice and the Venetian Adriatic Empire. Because pretty much from the founding of the Kingdom of Hungary, the Kingdom of Croatia was conquered and integrated into the Kingdom of Hungary. So it was a dual monarchy. If you're the King of Hungary, you're the King of Croatia. And Louis was tired of sharing coastline with the Venetians. He launched an attack and defeated the Venetians, giving them a very rare defeat. And so, for a time, the Kingdom of Hungary stretched from the Adriatic Sea all the way up to the Baltic Sea. At this time as well, Louis also subdued the Wallachian prince, kind of brought them under as a vassal, as well as gave his blessing and support to a Vlach nobleman who he sent across the Carpathians to establish the, Kingdom of Moldavia, or Kingdom of Moldova. Eventually that guy who establishes it, though, gets killed by a rival, and at that point on, Moldova really doesn't have any connection to Hungary. I actually want to walk over here real quick and point out something pretty cool. So, the government here in Hungary has been really working on restoring a lot of the buildings here in the castle district to how they looked like during the Habsburg Empire, because, as the theme of this video has pointed out, this is a city that wasn't meant to survive. It was bombed, conquered, decimated over and over and over again for the last 1,000 years. And then the Soviets came in and were like, you know what would be cool is let's go ahead and rebuild all the buildings in the city and make them look shitty, depressing, and communist. So this is the current government of Hungary's attempt to make up for that. So this building here, the royal stables down there, and a bunch of buildings over there, I'll point out, all are part of this initiative. So this is the famous Magyars fountain, or King Matthias if you're an English speaker. Matthias was arguably Hungary's greatest king, but we'll discuss him later on as we go farther into the castle district. We should try that marketing out in the US with like a Snickers bar or a package of Oreos and put Ben Stiller at the end of Dodgeball on it. But I want to talk a little bit about Buda Castle and its founding, because as you can see, it's more of a palace style today. But back in the day and the Middle Ages, it was truly a massive defensive fortress. In 1241, the Mongols invaded Hungary, and in that time, Bela IV was king of Hungary, and he led an army against the Mongols. The army was completely decimated, and Bela actually barely escapes with his life. He flees to coastal holdings on the Adriatic in modern-day Croatia and stays there for a while. But after that defeat, the Mongols wipe out 30 to 50% of the population of Hungary. But then mysteriously a year later, in 1242, the Mongols leave. Now, why did they leave? It's a couple reasons, but the main one is Ogadai Khan dies back in Mongolia. So the Mongols have to leave to deal with the secession. But Bela, seeing what happens, orders lords to build stone castles all across the Kingdom of Hungary. So if you come to Hungary, or what's now Slovakia, or the Transylvanian region in Romania, you'll see a lot of castles built around the 1240s, 1250s, and that was after the Mongol invasion and this royal decree from Bela to build some castles. And so Bela built this castle here in Buda. So Bela's actually kind of known as the second founder of Hungary, and is a massive historical figure here. After the Mongols invade, I mentioned that the population of Hungary is completely decimated. So because of that, Bela invites in Vlachs into Transylvania, Germans into the kingdom, and Slavs, and he repopulates the Kingdom of Hungary with neighboring peoples. So here, Vienna Gate. I'm not going to talk about that because I don't know anything about that, or do I want to know anything about that. That, however, is the turtle. The turtle. It's this mythical bird, and you can see it's carrying a sword within its talons. And the story goes that the Hungarians followed the turtle into the Carpathian Basin. It's their pagan, great mythical bird, and it landed in the Carpathian Basin, and that is where the Hungarians followed, the Magyar tribes followed the the big bird. That tree kind of looks like the Whomping Willow. Am I the American that's walking straight through the field you're probably not supposed to walk through instead of the path? Yes. So maybe it's at this point in the video you're like, oh my gosh, you haven't gotten to the point where how is the city not meant to describe? Well, besides the fact that the family that ruled here constantly killed each other and the Mongols invaded and wiped out almost 50% of the population of the country, that brings us to our next invaders, the Ottoman Empire, the mighty Turks in their fez hats. So the Ottomans and the Hungarians actually fought for about 200 years. And most of these conflicts started under Louis I, as the Ottomans and Hungarians were both kind of laying claim and seeking vassals in the Balkans. Officially, there's like 11 or 12 different wars between the Hungarians and the Ottomans for this 200-year period. But the part of this I want to highlight is a man named János Hunyadi. Cue all the triggered Romanians who are pissed that I didn't use the Romanian version of the name. János Hunyadi is one of the most badass figures of the Middle Ages in Europe. He was a beast of a man, a strategic genius, and he really held off the Turks and saved Europe for decades. Hunyadi eventually dies after the Battle of Belgrade. He saves Europe when the Ottomans siege Belgrade. He already is the region of Hungary at this point for the young King Ladislaus. To this day, church bells around Europe ring at noon in honor of Hunyadi's victory there. Bronzed balls. Everybody loves to rub the balls of that statue. Before we get to the second fall of Buda, this time, instead of the Mongols to the Ottomans, we need to talk about Matthias Corvinus, or Matthias Hunyadi, János Hunyadi's son, who becomes one of Hungary's greatest, if not greatest, kings. And ahead of us, you'll see Magyars Church, or Matthias Church. It's actually technically called the Church of Our Lady, but Matthias got married here twice, so it's become largely associated with him. And you can't see it right now, but there is a raven on the top corner right there. When Matthias became king of Hungary, he took the dynastic name Corvinus, which relates to or means raven, probably in Latin, not really sure. Not really an educated man. Anyways, this is another one of the buildings that you can see that has been refurbished here. Magyars was definitely the last great king of Hungary. Not long after his death, under Louis II of Hungary, the Ottomans capture Hungary. Magyars doesn't come from king's blood, right? His dad was a famous general, but he eventually gets put on the throne with the help of his uncle, who's, after his father's death, becomes a very powerful lord within Hungary, and he gets seated on the throne of Hungary. He puts the nobles in check. He creates the first and only professional standing army in the Central Europe region at the time, called the Black Army. They were a mercenary army who trained year-round, were extremely loyal to the king, not the lords of the country, and they just kicked fucking ass, really. And so for all of Magyars' reign, the Ottomans were on their back foot. But Magyars dies at the age of 47 in Vienna, because at this time Magyars actually conquers Vienna. He marches troops onto Vienna, and Vienna is part of the Kingdom of Hungary. He subdues the Bohemians. He's a total conqueror, just like Louis I. A lot of people think that he was murdered, possibly from a poisoned fig, that maybe his wife, Queen Beatrice, was involved. After his death, he has a bastard son named John, not Jon Snow, but John Corvinus. He does not become king of Hungary, and not long after, in 1526, King Louis II of Hungary is killed in battle against the Ottomans, and pretty much Hungary at that point ceases to be an independent kingdom. At this point, Buda becomes the capital, called Budin, for the Ottoman province here in Hungary. The Ottomans build a lot of the famous thermal baths that you see here in Budapest now. It also brings the coffee culture comes with the Ottomans, so Budapest was actually one of the first places in Europe that had coffee. The Ottomans also bring with them Islam and slavery. A lot of the Hungarians and the Germans and the Serbs that live here in Budapest are sold into slavery or forced to convert to Islam. Here you can see King Stephen, St. Stephen of Hungary. And then this is the famous Fisherman's Bastion, where when you come to Budapest, your girlfriend wants to go get a photo with the Parliament building in the background, and every basic chick is sitting there inside the window doing photo ops for an hour. Walking through here, you'll notice Fisherman's Bastion. There are 7 towers. I'm not dumb. I am. There's only 3 there, but there's 4 more that direction. And those represent the 7 Magyar tribes, the 7 Hungarian tribes that conquer and settle the Carpathian Basin. After the Ottomans captured Buda, Hungary is basically split into 3 different dominions. There's Royal Hungary, which is like the northwest part of Hungary, and that was under Habsburg influence. There was Transylvania in the east, which got its own prince, and it was a vassal to the Ottoman Empire. And then there's Ottoman Buda, which is Ottoman Hungary, which was directly governed by the Ottomans. And you can see ruins here of a really big old church. The Ottomans actually, while this was the royal capital of Hungary, there was the crowning capital. I guess all the Hungarian kings were crowned in Székesfehérvár, and a lot of them were buried there too. And when the Ottomans came up through here, they sacked the cathedral all the Hungarian kings were buried in, destroyed their tombs, scattered their bones, and to this day they're still trying to piece together who's who there. Buda becomes largely Islamic. Balkan Muslims move in to Buda, and in a lot of Ottoman territories, right, the Muslim elite get special privileges, and the Christians and the Jewish population in Hungary suffered a lot. But one thing that the Ottomans also brought with them is the slave market. I don't think it's a secret, the Ottomans had a massive slave market, just like the Arabs did. And so a lot of Germans, Hungarians, Slavs that were living in the Kingdom of Hungary were then sold into slavery as part of the Ottoman slave trade. And there were slave markets all up and down the banks of the Danube River here in Budapest. So a distinction I want to make, oh wait, one sec, look how pretty that is. Super, super pretty. Anyways, a distinction I want to make about this city being erased. It was a little different with the Ottomans. The Mongols eradicated 30 to 50% of the population, destroyed this city. With the Habsburgs as well, the city was completely destroyed. The civilian casualties were immense because of the siege and the battle. But the Ottomans, the massacre actually starts after they get a hold of the city. They take Buda without any bloodshed. At the time, there was John II. He was an infant king, and Suleiman the Magnificent of the Ottoman Empire arrives in Buda saying he's trying to protect the king from the Habsburgs. The Hungarian nobles temporarily let the Ottoman troops into the castle district. And while there's ceremony and feasting, the Ottoman troops, the Janissaries, secure the walls of the fortress, and they take the city without any bloodshed. After the Ottoman collapse, power doesn't stay here in Buda. It moves across the river to Pest. Budapest is no longer medieval, it's no longer Ottoman. It's now imperial, industrial, national. Most importantly, it's occupied. The next 3 centuries of history in this city is filled with bloodshed, revolution, and dire stakes for the Hungarian people. And we'll cover all of this in our next video, covering the Pest side of the river.